Hey, how's it going, everyone? Today I wanted to talk about the exciting news of Resident Evil 4 Remake DLC. I'll be talking a little bit about the VR stuff, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on Separate Ways as well as the upcoming free update to the Mercenaries. So officially we now know that Resident Evil 4's VR mode will be coming this winter. It looks pretty cool. I'm actually really looking forward to possibly trying it out sometime. I don't have a VR headset as of yet, but if I ever do get the ability to play the game in VR, I would really love the chance to do so because I really enjoyed Resident Evil 4 Remake and I'd like to experience it in a completely different way. That all said, what I really want to focus on is the Separate Ways DLC. That DLC is looking very interesting because it's not necessarily like the original Separate Ways. It looks like we are going to have more story to Separate Ways this time around and some interesting changes that were not there in the original Resident Evil 4. The really neat thing about this new DLC for Separate Ways is that it looks like we are getting some new locations that were not featured in the original, but were actually featured in some of the earlier builds, the prototype builds of Resident Evil 4, if you will, that are now seemingly present in this game. There were a few shots here and there that kind of indicated that. It does also seem like they are keeping that whole identity of Separate Ways intact as well, where Ada will go through alternative locations that we're familiar with in the main game that Leon never actually goes through or isn't able to go through in the main game, which I think is pretty neat that they are keeping that intact. The other neat thing is that it does seem as though Lewis is going to have more involvement with this story this time around, which I do think is pretty cool because he wasn't really involved in the original Separate Ways, so I'm okay with this change. What I'm also interested to see though is that if Wesker is going to have more involvement, because it seems like people are assuming that's the case, but I really did not get that impression based off of the trailer, and that may change because there is supposed to be some gameplay in the next few days that's going to show off how Separate Ways will be played and what it's going to feature as opposed to the main game, which I do think that's good, and we might see something in relation to Wesker, but we don't really know. As of this moment, it just seems like it's going to be Lewis that's going to get more expanded upon with this story as opposed to Wesker. Either way, I do think it's going to be good to see those characters get expanded upon and brought back for this side story, and I'd really like to see how it turns out because they are doing some interesting changes, like having Ada be infected in the story this time around, which was not something that happened in the original Resident Evil 4. So I do have a couple of questions in regards to Separate Ways, and that is, will the Assignment Ada aspect of that side game blend into this new Separate Ways, or will that just be completely forgotten and we're just never going to see Assignment Ada? That would be kind of unfortunate because I did actually enjoy Assignment Ada somewhat from the original Resident Evil 4, but I do understand why they would want to cut it because it doesn't really add or change anything to Resident Evil 4 as an experience. And if Separate Ways can be expanded upon to be a much longer experience, well, Assignment Ada then doesn't really have a place to be there then. The other thing that I want to know is, in the original Resident Evil 4, when you were playing as Ada, you could not upgrade any of her weapons. Those weapons had prefix stats to them and you just had to deal with it. Anytime you ran out of ammo, you had to just consider selling weapons and just buying them back to refill your ammo, or hope that the RNG would work in your favor and that you would get ammo drops for the weapons that you really needed ammo for. I am hoping that there will be an upgrade system in this new Separate Ways because that was the main issue that I had with the original. I'm also hoping that there's going to be maybe some other weapons to purchase other than just the ones that she is supposed to have in Separate Ways. So maybe some of the stuff that we saw in the main game, maybe even some of the attachments as well, because that was something that was also sorely missed from the main game when playing the original Separate Ways. Just some things that I do think would make Separate Ways a much better experience. I am also curious about if any of the cut weapons are going to make a comeback in Separate Ways as unlockables, and if maybe we're going to see other things such as new unlockable costumes outside of the one that was already leaked. I am also interested to know if we're going to see any unique or original enemies that are going to make a comeback, or maybe even some of the enemies that were cut, specifically like the U3 boss fight, which would be neat to see. I do think that they could at least make up for the fact that it was cut in the main game by including it in Separate Ways, which would mean that at least it made some sort of comeback and it is in the game, just not in the main game per se. Now, before I move on to the Mercenaries, I did want to clarify that Separate Ways is going to be a paid for DLC, which was not clarified in the trailer. In the trailer, they made it seem as though all of the DLC that was coming to the game was going to be free, and that is not the case. Separate Ways is a $10 DLC that you will have to pay for, and that is also specified on the Resident Evil 4 Remake website, which I'll have a link down to in the description below. So go ahead and check that out. It will clarify that yes, that is a paid for DLC. Now, the Mercenaries I'm super excited about because we are going to have the additional 2 characters that were not in the launch of the game. They were not there for Mercenaries, which was very unfortunate, but it is nice to see that those 2 characters are making a comeback, and from what I can gather so far, it does seem as though both Ada and Wesker will be sporting 2 different handguns compared to their original release of Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries, where in the original Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries, Wesker had a suppressed Silver Ghost, which was the handgun that you were using at the very beginning of Resident Evil 4 in the main game, and for Ada, she was originally using a Punisher, both of which had customized stats specific for them in Mercenaries. However, it does seem like this time around, Ada will be using the Blacktail from the main game, and Wesker will be using a customized M9, not his Samurai Edge, which I thought was very interesting. So he's not going to be going in with his Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries loadout per se. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be similar to his Resident Evil 4 original loadout. What I'm really hoping for is that both of the characters get a major update and improvement in terms of their gameplay for the Mercenaries, where they're just far more fun to play compared to their original counterpart. Ada especially, because she never seems to have a good loadout and just good set of abilities for Mercenaries, and I'm really hoping that they try to make a push to make that character far more enjoyable to play in the Mercenaries, because her last few renditions of really anything multiplayer or co-op related have just not been that great, and Mercenaries is no exception with that. So I'm really hoping that they improve that character's loadout and just overall abilities for the Mercenaries. Wesker I'm very interested in seeing too, because I'm wondering how they're going to implement his unique weapons that aren't found in the main game, and I'm really hoping that maybe they can add in some original or unique weapons from his loadout, or even from Ada's loadout from Separate Ways and her Mercenaries update into the main game, because I do think that it would be really cool to just use a bunch of stuff that you can't normally use in the main game. But only time will tell on that one, and likely we will not see that stuff, but it is something that I thought I'd just throw out there, that it would be pretty cool to see just being able to use that stuff. I'm very excited for the Mercenaries update. I'm really hoping that they possibly consider doing even more for Mercenaries. I doubt that they ever will, but if things go well, maybe, maybe not. So that being all said, I really want to know what you all think down in the comment section below. What do you all want to see out of Separate Ways? What are you all hoping for Mercenaries? Are you excited for Resident Evil 4 VR on PlayStation VR 2? Anything else related to Resident Evil? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one. And if you haven't already, please consider giving this video a like, maybe even subscribing, and I will see you all later. Matane.